In this video, we're going to talk about using a FortiGate firewall and FortiAPs for guest network management. So first off, real quick, we'll just cover the importance of guest networks. So it goes without saying that guest users should never be on our production internal LAN networks. Guest networks also reduce risk, so we can implement segmentation, least privilege, and we have auditability for our guest users. So really the common goals when deploying a guest network is just to provide simple internet access. We want to keep guests away from our internal resources. And optionally, we can identify users, so we can set terms and capture emails and things like that. So we'll review all of that and how you can do that using a FortiGate and FortiAP. And at the end of the day, the right approach is going to depend on your environment. So whether you have an office, a school, you're in retail, healthcare, etc., the type of guest network that you deploy and the type of captive portal you deploy and the firewall policies you create, all of that are going to differ on your specific use case. But hopefully by the end of this video, you have enough information to make an informed decision on what method is going to work best for you. So real quick, I just want to also talk about the built-in guest capabilities with the FortiGate and FortiAP versus something like FortiNAC or FortiAuthenticator. So using the FortiGate and the FortiAP, that in itself provides a pretty solid guest experience with the use of captive portals. So it should also be noted that there's no external licensing required to use this guest function within the FortiGate. So deploying guest networks and managing guest users and customizing captive portals with custom HTML and images and all that stuff, there's no additional license to use these features. So it is pretty robust for certain use cases, but if you do need more of an advanced feature set for guest lifecycle and onboarding, then something like FortiAuthenticator or FortiNAC might be what you need. So with FortiAuthenticator, you can do things like guest self-registration and stronger identity workflows. You can do SMS and email password. And with FortiNAC, you get a more full onboarding and profiling experience. You can do posture checking, dynamic enforcement. We can have policies for BYOD devices, right? And it'll just give us more control from an access control perspective. So for a lot of use cases, the FortiGate and AP is enough, but for larger enterprises and for some advanced use cases, you might need to get one of the options that I listed here, but I just wanted to review that. So next we'll talk about the actual guest network options. So these captive portals can be used with open networks, they can be used with WPA2 networks, and they can be used with WPA3 SAE security options. So really, when it comes down to which one you pick, it's going to come down to your specific use case and your security requirements. So obviously with an open SSID, for example, it's not going to ask for a password before the captive portal appears, which might be good or bad depending on your use case and what kind of captive portal you actually are looking to use. So when you're using an open network, right, as we know, there's no like over-the-air encryption, right? So those 802.11 frames aren't protected by the WPA2 or WPA3 security. So even though, login pages might be in HTTPS and most websites are HTTPS, the wireless link itself is still open. So that's something you might want to keep in mind depending on the type of organization you have. If you use a WPA2 or WPA3 SSID with captive portal, it's going to require the user to enter the PSK to join the Wi-Fi network first. So that's where the association and encryption keys happen. And then after they join, the captive portal still forces guest logon or term acceptance or email collection and all that kind of stuff, right? So what you get in addition to the captive portal authentication is you get that encrypted Wi-Fi link between the client and the AP. And that's going to protect against casual sniffing on the air that might be happening. And it also will keep random people from joining your SSID, right? So if you just have an open ID, an open SSID rather, with a terms page, basically anyone can just click that and connect. So depending on the amount of clients you're able to support and the amount of bandwidth you have and how you have your firewall policies or any traffic shaping policies, that might not be good for your use case. So again, you just have to decide your use case and pick what's best for you. But I think it was just important to mention that. As for captive portal types, there's 4. So we can do a disclaimer where it will just display like a terms and conditions page, and the user can either accept or reject those terms. If they accept, they will be granted network access. If they reject, they will not. There's authentication. So there's a captive portal with an authentication menu where you can basically define guest users, where they have to enter the username and password. So you can have a single account that you can use for multiple guests, or you can have it set up where guests come to your site. So let's say you have an office and you have maybe customers coming or contractors or something. When they check in at your front desk, you can give them their username and password for guest access, and each user will have its own one. You can combine these into a disclaimer plus authentication page where they will have to authenticate to the network and also accept the terms of the network. And then there's also an email collection method where to get onto the network access, they have to enter an email address. And you will actually be able to see these email addresses on the FortiGate and collect them. So this is useful, right? It depends on the type of organization you're running. But if you wanted to do something like collecting emails to send out newsletters or promos or vouchers or marketing type emails, this is something that you can use if you were interested in that. It's also worth noting that the captive portal pages on the FortiGate are completely customizable. So this can be used to enhance your user experience. So you can use custom HTML. You can also upload custom images to make the captive portal, have your company branding and verbiage on it. Maybe your legal team has specific verbiage they want to use on guest networks, things like that. All of this is customizable, and we'll review how to do all of this. And then, like I said previously, that we can actually create a special administrative user for the FortiGate that has the ability to only manage guest accounts. So a good use case for this is, like I said, if you wanted to have each guest user or each visitor to your site have their own guest login for the guest network, you could, for example, have your security person at the front desk when they check in users to your building, right? They might give them a badge or a name tag or something. Along with that, they can sign into the FortiGate using this account, and they'll have the access to create guest users, so they can create accounts for these people and then give them the credentials. So we'll review how to do that as well in this video. So just kind of setting the stage here for what we're going to do in this video and what the demo is going to show. So we'll show some caveats you have to keep in mind for guest DNS settings, as DNS resolution is required for the users to actually complete the captive portal process. We'll review the captive portal settings. We'll review creating wireless SSIDs. We'll customize some of the captive portals and show you how you can do that with custom HTML and image uploading. We'll create a guest firewall policy just so we can test the network access once we connect and make sure everything's working. We'll show all the different captive portal methods, and as we do that, obviously we'll just talk about some general tips and best practices along the way. And just for lab environment purposes, this is the lab environment that I'm working with. So I have a FortiGate 71F. It's running FortiOS 7.4.11. We got a FortiSwitch 108E running 7.4.8 and a FortiAP 221E running 7.4.5. All of the methods that I'm going to show on this video are valid as of firmware versions 5 and 0. So there really shouldn't be anybody who can't perform this, right? If you're running versions 5 or 5.0 or earlier, you have some different things you have to be worrying about. So, right, so even if you have the newer G series models or the K series AP models, all of this is going to work on those as well. So no matter what kind of hardware you have, you should be able to deploy the methods that we're going to do in this video. So That's it for the presentation, and now we'll hop over to the FortiGate and start the demo. So now we're on the firewall itself, and I'll just show you a couple things real quick. So obviously you see we have our FortiGate, we have our switch. I forgot to mention earlier that you don't need a FortiSwitch to do all the things we're going to show in the video. It's just what I have in my lab. So you could have a third-party switch or whatever. This is just for FortiGate and AP. Of course, you can do captive portal on switch ports, but we're doing wireless in this case, so just thought I would mention that. So you see my switch is connected, and you see I have my AP online as well. So I just want to talk about a couple things before we get started. So, because you might, deploy these captive portal networks, and you might find that there's some issues with them, whether the captive portal isn't popping up, or internet access isn't working, or it's not consistent, or whatever it might be. So there's a couple things you just kind of want to make sure are in place before you actually start configuring these networks. And this is stuff that I've experienced, so I just kind of collected them all, and I'll show you them now. So the first thing is the captive portal retention timeout period. So what this means is, by default, the captive portal timeout is set to 5 minutes, which means that if a user connects to the guest network, and then let's say they walk away from their computer, or they put their phone in their pocket and then they take it out 5 minutes later, it's going to have them authenticate to the captive portal again since 5 minutes passed. And obviously this isn't really that much time, and this can get annoying for your users. So I like to increase this value. So I'll show you how to do that. So if we go to the CLI and we do a config user setting, and we'll just show the value. So the value is called auth timeout. I'm going to do grep here. So you can see here that by default, this is the value. Set auth timeout 5, and 5 being in minutes. So this value is in minutes. So we can extend this to up to 1 day. I usually don't set it that high, but for the purposes of this, obviously, right, it's going to depend on your use case. So just for the purpose of like testing in this video and doing this demo, we'll set this to 180. Set auth timeout 180. So that'd be 3 hours, right? So we just change that value. So feel free to change that to whatever you want. I will note that it is possible, right? I did say that's a max. This has a maximum value of 1440, which equates to 1 day. If you wanted to increase that to beyond a day, you can do that, but you would have to change another setting here. So you see here how it says set auth timeout, or auth timeout type, and then it says idle timeout. You could change this to a value called hard timeout. So let me just show you that. So if we do set auth timeout type, you can see here by default it's idle timeout. So it just goes by how long the user is actually idle for before they have to re-auth. And then you have this value for hard timeout. So if you set this to hard timeout, basically what you could do is, if you have guest user groups for authentication, like if you're using the authentication captive portal, you could then set the auth timeout in that actual user group to be up to 1 month. We're not going to do that for this case. There might be use cases in your environment where you might have to do that. I'm going to put a link in the description. It's a documentation from Fortinet that explains this and shows it, so you can just have it as a reference point and you can read through it. It's only a page long, and you can read that and see if this is something you might have to do for your environment. But for this environment, we're going to keep it at the default setting, like that. So now that that's out of the way, one thing I also want to mention is, if the authentication timeout is coming earlier than your configured values, you might just want to make sure that the guest client, if they have MAC randomization on, this might be impacting that timeout, right? Because if the network detects that it's the device is connecting and it's a new MAC address, it's going to think that that's a new device and it's going to have the device re-authenticate. So that's something just to keep in mind too. You might, set this to an hour, but then every few minutes it's trying to re-auth. So that might be why that's happening. And also you want to make sure your IP lease time is not expiring. So maybe you have really strict IP address config time or lease times on your DHCP settings. So check that as well. So that's the two most common that I run into when I'm doing these. So now that that's out of the way, I want to also just talk about DNS settings and how DNS settings relate to guest network and captive portal networks on FortiGate. So I said this in the presentation that for the guest captive portal to actually work, the user needs to be able to resolve DNS. Well, the problem is that the user has no network access until the captive portal process is actually complete. So how do we actually get around this? So there's a few ways to do it, and I'll show you my preferred method. I think it's the easiest method, but there is in total 3 methods that I've found that you can do this. So the first method I'll show you is in my opinion, the easiest. So you can see here we have no SSIDs. So just for the purpose of this, I'll just make a quick SSID. So we could just name this like guest demo. We can just give it an IP address. I'm going to remove this after, but I just want to show you what I mean just so you can have this set up. So we'll just enable ping, turn on DHCP. So you can see here, when we enable DHCP, we have this setting DNS server. So this is the DNS server that it's going to assign our clients. So what I like to do is set this as the same interface IP. So essentially what it's going to do is assign this IP, the interface's IP, to the users. And this way, when users resolve DNS, we're going to set up a DNS forwarder. So the IP address or the interface on this firewall is essentially just going to be a DNS forwarder. So the interface itself is going to forward those DNS requests on the client's behalf. And that's going to allow the clients, even before they're done completing the captive portal process, to resolve DNS. So if I just change this to demo, and I enable captive portal, we'll just do authentication. Guest 123, we'll just set it at for now. Right, so if we just do this, disclaimer. So we'll just do disclaimer only with a WPA2 password. You can see here. And we have our DNS server set for same as interface IP. Right, so now that would be our guest SSID as an example. Obviously not fully configured, I'm just showing you the DNS settings. So if we come to our DNS servers now, you might have to enable this in feature visibility if you don't already have it configured, DNS database right here. So we go back to our DNS servers, we can create a DNS service on an interface. So we can create new, and we can essentially select what would be our guest SSID. And we can just set forward to system DNS. And of course we can apply DNS filter here if we want, but we'll just hit OK here. So basically what this is going to do is when users connect to our SSID, it's going to send the DNS request to this IP address, the interface IP of the SSID. And then once it receives those, it's going to forward those to the system DNS that we have configured here. So if we go to our DNS settings on the FortiGate, you can see that we have specified 8.8.8.8 and 1.1.1.1. So we'll use those for DNS resolution. So that is my preferred method of doing this. The other ways you can do it is, you probably saw it when I was in here before, is you can make use of this setting here, exempt destinations and services. So essentially what we could do is add our DNS servers and add the DNS port like this. And that would allow the users that are connecting to this captive portal network to get to these services and IP addresses without having to complete the process. So that's another method you could do. And then additionally, what you could do is create a firewall policy, and there's a setting that you can apply on a firewall policy to exempt that from captive portal access also. So for example, for your guest users, you could have a policy to allow them HTTPS access to the internet for web access, but then above that you can have a policy saying allow them to get to 8.8.8.8 and Google, and then there's a setting called captive portal exempt enable. So you can do that as well. So I don't have any firewall policies yet because we're going to configure that as part of this, but I'll put the links for this in the description just so you can read that. But just to keep it simple, I like to do it this method by assigning the users the interface IP as the DNS server and then setting up a DNS forwarder on that interface. So that's my preferred method. So now that that's kind of out of the way, we will actually get into now configuring the SSIDs and customizing portals and testing them. Alright, now we can actually get into configuring some of these SSIDs. You see here I just made this firewall policy just to allow the guest SSID out to the internet, just so when we actually connect to it we can confirm that it's working and that traffic is passing. So this is a simple policy I did. It's just an allow all. At the end of the video I might show like what I like to do for guest networks and policies, but obviously it's going to depend on your requirements and your organization and what you're trying to allow or block for guests. So, and like I said before, there is that exempt from captive portal policy. So it is here in the GUI. So if that's something you want to do in the GUI rather than the CLI, you can do it there. So not to get sidetracked, but let's go back to the SSID we made. We're going to change a couple things because we just set it up before basically just to set up the DNS forwarding for the captive portal. But we can see here we named our SSID guest demo. It's a tunnel SSID. We gave it an IP address. We assigned ping only to the management interface. We enabled DHCP. So this is our DHCP range, and for the DNS settings we set to same as interface IP. We have device detection on. We gave our SSID a name, so this is what the users will actually see when they go to connect, so name this whatever fits your requirement. There's this client limit setting here, so this might apply if you're trying to actually limit the number of clients that can connect to this SSID at any given time. I'm just going to leave it blank for now, but that is something that you can do. And then now we're interested in the security mode settings. So like I said in the presentation part, you can use, for security mode settings, you can do open SSIDs, WPA2 and WPA3. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to have everything be WPA2. So when I go to connect to my network, it's going to ask me for what the password is, and then the captive portal will pop up and we can complete whatever captive portal that we select. So right, you can set this to open, you can set this to WPA3 and set it up, but you'll still be able to use all these different types of captive portals no matter what method you actually select. So we have WPA2, we set our password, it's just going to be guest123, obviously make it something different, whatever fits your requirement. We enable captive portal here, and now we're greeted with the portal type. So we can see that the first option we're going to show is the disclaimer only. So essentially this is just going to show like a terms and conditions page, basically saying like, by agreeing to this network, you know that all the activity is monitored and not to do anything illegal or whatever. So we'll keep this. Now we have the option to customize the captive portal. So if I turn this on, we'll show this later, but if I turn this on, you can see that I can create different portals, so it won't be the default one. So I can put my branding on there, I can put my logo, I can change the colors, I can put my own wordings and my own terms and conditions, right? So just as a quick example, we'll just keep this disabled and then we'll show how to enable these later, or how to configure these later. Exempt sources and destinations. This is to exempt certain sources or destinations and services from the captive portal. We're going to leave this blank. And then we see redirect after captive portal. So we can actually configure this so that when the captive portal is completed, we can send those users to a specific website. So for example, we can have it so when the user actually completes the captive portal registration, it will send them to our company website. So that's what most people do. So just for the example here, I can make this Fortinet.com. So when we actually complete the process, we'll get forwarded to this site. So our PSK, and right, we have some additional settings here that don't really apply to us. Really the only thing, if you wanted to do like traffic shaping for guests, you could do that. And also you could do stuff like scheduling where the guest network is only available during business hours or something. That's a common one too. But since it's just a quick demo, we'll keep all of this disabled, or default rather. So we'll go ahead and submit that, and now we have our SSID, and now what we have to do is actually assign that SSID to our AP profile, and we see we are doing SSIDs, tunnel SSIDs anyway, so this should be broadcasting, so we can just confirm really quick. Okay, it is broadcasting. So what we're going to do is hop over to the test machine, and we can show the captive portal process for the disclaimers. Okay, so now we're on our test client. So we can see here that this device is not connected to any network. So what we'll do is we'll hit our available Wi-Fi networks, and we can see we have our demo SSID that we just configured. So we'll connect to this. We set the password WPA2 key, so we'll have to enter it here. If this was open, this would not show up. So we can type in the password that we set. It's going to connect, and we can see that we are greeted with this captive portal page. So you see by default the captive portal page is on port 1000. You can change that, but we'll just leave it for now. And we can see this is the default terms and disclaimers agreement. So we basically see here it just says you're going to connect to this network, and you're basically assuming the risk, and don't do anything illegal, all that kind of stuff. And it says, do you agree or do you decline? We'll hit agree, and we can see it connects us to the network, and it redirected us to Fortinet.com. So that's quickly just showing how the guest network works, or the guest captive portal works, using the disclaimer method. What we'll do is we'll hop back over to the firewall, and we'll show how to configure different types of captive portal, and we'll also get into how to configure these captive portal pages so that you can put your logo on them and all that sort of thing. Alright, so now we're back on the firewall, and we can go over, now that we actually tested and confirmed that our portal is working and that the guest user can connect by accepting the disclaimer. Now we can actually look at how to customize that page to make the guest experience better. So what I'll show you real quick, actually, since we have a user who already connected, if you run this command, here we can actually see our guest users, and we can see the idle timeout, so we can see how much longer they have until the session actually expires. So this is a good command to know, so I just figured I'd throw it in there real quick. Anyway, what we'll do now is we will configure a custom captive portal so that the portal isn't just that default page. So what you'll want to do first is go to feature visibility, and there is a setting here called replacement message group. So you have to enable this so you can actually configure custom pages. So make sure you turn that on, and then it'll be right here under replacement message groups. So you can see this is the default ones. If we hit this extended view, you can see all the different pages. So all the different block pages, or portal pages, or login pages, or really any page that could come up via the FortiGate will be shown in here. So if you just click any one of these, you can see what it looks like, right? So these are what some of them look like here. We hit email collection, right? So this is kind of what we were seeing on the test we were doing, this disclaimer page right here. So you can see these are read-only. We can't edit these, but we can see how these are configured. So what we'll do is first we'll want to upload, if you want to upload your own logo, you can do that here. So we'll do that. Just for the case of this video, we'll just upload our own personal Fortinet company logo. So if we go back to replacement messages and we hit this manage images button, we can see there's 3 of them by their default that the system uses for some of the built-in portal pages and disclaimer pages. So if we just hit create new, we can upload an image. So we can, for example, select this one, just a simple Fortinet logo, and we can see here's your image types and your maximum image size. So just keep that in mind as well. And we'll give this a name, and this name is important because this is the name that's actually going to be referenced in the custom HTML code that we put on our custom pages. So for the purpose of this, we'll just name this demo. Okay. So now you can see our images there. Just make sure it's there. Okay. So now if we go to replacement message groups, we can create a new replacement message group. So this will where our custom pages will be, right? So we can just name this Wi-Fi demo, and this will be an authentication, right? There's 2 different types of messages. There are ones that are related to security. So these are things like block pages or things like that, right? Like web filter blocks, application blocks, antivirus block pages, DLP block pages, and then there's authentication. And so for this case, this is an authentication page, so we'll select authentication, we'll hit OK. And if we go into our group here, we can see all the different pages that we're able to customize. So we'll type in disclaimer, so you can see here that there's the disclaimer page. So this is the page that we saw earlier. So basically what you can do, just to make your life easier, you can just ask Gemini or GPT or Claude or whatever LLM you like to use just to make you a custom captive portal for this. So you can just basically copy this into it and be like, here's the default page. Can you make me a custom one that meets my needs, right? So you can tell it if you want it to be a certain color or have certain features or what you want it to say. And it can help you do that, so you're saving time here. So I already did one. So what I'll do is I'll just copy this over into here. So we'll copy this whole thing and we'll paste my new one. So here's my new page. You can see you can get pretty detailed with how you make the page look. You can keep it simple. You can kind of do something more advanced like this. So you can see I have my terms and disclaimer, I have my guest Wi-Fi, and I still have my buttons here. And like I said before, you can see here when it has like this image demo, this is the actual image name that we uploaded. So you just want to make sure that that matches. Otherwise, the photo is the image that you uploaded isn't going to show here. So we'll hit OK here. So now you can see here this changed to modified. And we have this little green check mark, so this means that we made a custom page. So what we'll also do is you can see there's this disclaimer decline page. So if a guest happened to hit decline, this is the page they'd be greeted with. We want this to also be branded in our company logo. So we can do the same thing here. We can take the one that we made and paste it into here. You see this looks a whole lot nicer than the default one. So we can hit save here. And now what we have to do is go back to our SSID. And there's a setting down here called Customize Captive Portal. So we'll enable this and then we'll select the Captive Portal replacement message group that we just created. So we'll select that and then we will hit OK. Okay, so now that that's done, let's hop back over to the test client and show what the new portal looks like. All right, so now we're back on the test client and we'll try to reconnect to the test SSID. So here it is. We will connect. We see we get our new captive portal, which looks a lot nicer. So we can hit that we agree and accept. And now we get redirected to the Fortinet.com per our captive portal rule. And right, we can browse the internet. So that's just quickly how to customize that captive portal and prove that it works. So feel free to customize that however you want to make it your own and to abide by your standards and to show your company branding on it. So now that that's done, we'll move on to guest authentication portals and guest account creation. All right, so now we're back on the firewall. Now we can go over how we can configure guest accounts and guest groups and guest administrators and customize the captive portal for this purpose. So first thing I want to mention is this might be confusing, but when you get a FortiGate and it's factory reset, or if you factory reset an existing firewall, you're going to see that by default you get this guest user under user definition and this guest group. So let me just delete this group. But you see this one comes by default. So you see this isn't referenced anywhere, and the only reference that this guest user is in is that it's a member of that group. So that does not relate to what we're doing now, right? So, and this doesn't do anything unless you actually assign it somewhere. But I just wanted to throw that out there because that can be a little bit confusing. But this does not apply to what we're going to be doing. So what we'll end up doing here, and we'll show this, is what we can do is here, if we go to guest management, this is where we can actually configure our guest network users and groups, right? So we see here it says that there's no guest groups configured and that a guest user group must be created before guests can be managed. So what we'll do is we'll say, okay, let's create a new guest group. We can give it a name. And we're going to set the type here to guest. And you see once we do that, we get these options. So we're going to leave most of this default. We'll change a couple things, but let's just go through what each thing means. So batch guest account creation, so we can create accounts in batches. We will just leave this disabled for now. User ID, so this will be what the user actually uses to sign in, right, like the username field. So just for the purposes of this, we'll keep it the email, but we can have the firewall auto-generate one, and we can also specify usernames if we wanted to. But just for the purpose of this, we'll keep the user ID as email. We also see there's a maximum accounts field, so if we wanted to have a limit on the amount of guests we can actually create, we could do that, but we'll just keep this disabled by now. So now under guest details, this is actually going to be the details we're going to have to enter when we create our users. So we will enable name, so we'll have to give the account a name. We'll keep email enabled. SMS we will keep disabled. The purpose of these is that you can actually, from the firewall, send an email or an SMS containing the account information. So when we put our email in for our user, we can actually say, okay, now that that's created, send an email to that email account that has their guest user information, so we can send it to them directly if we wanted to. Password, we'll do auto-generate for now. You can do specify if we want, but it's just easier to keep it like this, especially if you're going to have like a non-IT person be in control of this. Sponsor we'll keep enabled, and company will also keep enabled. And then now here we have the expiration. So we can set the account to expire on a certain time interval, either when we actually create the account or after the first login. I like to change this to first login just because this allows you to create the accounts prior to your guests actually arriving on site. And the timer will only start once they actually complete their initial sign-in. So we'll change this to 8 hours since a workday is typically 8 hours, right? So if they arrive to the office or to your corporate building at 8 in the morning, that'll give them the whole day to use that account for guest network access. So that's it. So we'll create this by hitting OK, and you can see now we have this demo guest group, and the type is guest. So now we can actually create the user, and there's actually a pretty cool feature that we can use. So let's say we wanted to have, let's say we had like a front desk person or an HR person who was responsible for guests coming into our office, like maybe it was contractors or vendors or customers or someone for an interview or someone was coming for a tour of our facility or performing maintenance and we wanted to create guest accounts for each user. Maybe we wanted to have somebody at the front desk or somebody who's in charge of our events or HR be responsible for actually creating those guest accounts as part of the visitation process. So we can actually do that by creating an administrator. So this is firewall administrators, right? So this is my admin account. We can actually create an admin account. And we see this option here, restrict admin to guest provision only. So that means when this username, or when this admin rather, signs into the firewall, the only thing they'll be able to do is create guest accounts. They won't be able to access any other items of the config. They won't even be able to view them. They won't be able to open the CLI. It'll just be for the purposes of creating guest accounts. So if we turn this on, we can select the group and we can create this account. Give it a password and create this user here. So now we actually have this system administrator that will only be used for that purpose. So I'll actually show that. So if I log out, we sign in with the guest user admin. We can see when we sign in, we can't see anything, and we're in this menu to create guest users. So the only thing really to keep in mind here is if you were giving this to an HR person or your security front desk or whatever it is, that whatever PC that they're using, you're going to have to create a rule so that they can get to the firewall management interface. So just keep that in mind as well. So let's actually now create our guest user. So we can see here, we can hit create new and we get these fields. So we can just name this user. So we can just give it a name, sponsor. We can keep anything that's in white is optional. Really the only thing that's required is the email, and it's going to create a password. We can just fill this in. So let's say, somebody from the office invited this person or they're here to see a specific person. We can put that person's name here just so for record keeping purposes. We can put the company that they're involved in. So let's do a test. Let's say we have someone from the FBI coming in to give a presentation or something. And then we'll put the user's email here. So we can just do user@fbi.com. And you see by default, we have this 8-hour expiration that we set earlier when we created the group. And there's a comments field if you wanted to throw some extra information in there. Maybe the purpose of the visit or something like that. So that's it. So we can hit OK. And now we can see we have our user here. So the user ID, that's what they're going to use to sign in. So that'd be their username. And we can see that it automatically created this password. Right? So let's sign in or log out and log back in with our regular admin because we have to create some additional changes for this to actually work. Okay. So if we actually look here, we go to our guest management, what we can actually do is we can actually print this page. So we can see here if we wanted to print this out and have a piece of paper to give to the user when they arrive on site with the username and password, we could do that. The only thing to keep in mind is that it does here have the management IP of the firewall. So you might just want to cut this out. Like if you wanted to give them a piece of paper, you could just print this and then cut it here and then give that to them when they sign in. It's just an option that's available. What you can also do is send an email. So if I click this here, send email, it will actually send an email to the email specified in the user that has this information as well. So again, another option you can leverage there. So what we actually have to do now is on our firewall policy, our guest firewall policy, we have to assign that user group to the policy so that those users actually get access to the network when they sign in. So we added that user group here. We'll hit OK to apply. Then what we have to do is go back to our SSID and make some changes to allow the authentication to occur. So if we scroll down, we see our portal type. We'll change this to authentication. And we're going to use the local authentication portal, which will be the firewall itself. And we'll define, or we'll specify rather, our user group that we just created. And again, we'll keep the custom portal and we'll keep everything else the same. So now this should be ready to go. The only thing I want to cover again here is to actually customize that login page. And I'll show you again how to do that here. So if we go to our replacement message groups and we go to our group that we created, you see here we have this login page and this login failed page. So this will be the pages that we actually want to edit here. So if we open up the login page, for example, here's the login page by default. You see it's just this simple page with the Fortinet branding, and it's just asking for a username and password. So similar to how we did for the disclaimer page, we can do our own page. So I have one that I made. So if we just copy this, you can see this looks a lot nicer. We have our own logo in there. We have some notes. And we have the authentication page here that the user can actually use to sign in. It makes it a lot easier and looks a lot nicer for the user, right? So we'll save this. And then we have this login fail page. So what if the user mistypes their password or mistypes their username, or they're having problems signing in? We want to have some notes there just to assist them. So I made a page for this as well. So we can take this and replace it here. So if I, for some reason, fail my authentication, it'll have some notes here just to check that your caps lock isn't on, make sure you're typing it correctly, make sure your account isn't expired, and to make sure that your account is actually active, and to contact help if necessary, right? So we'll save this too. Okay, so that's it. So basically, just to review what we did there to get this working is we had to create a guest user group here. That then gave us access to actually create guest users. We also created an administrator just for the purpose of provisioning guest accounts. We then added that guest group to the firewall policy to allow those users network access. We then edited the SSID and set the captive portal for authentication and defined our group that we want to be able, those users to be able to authenticate against this SSID. And then we customized the captive portal pages so that we get this nicer looking page for the user. So now that that's done, we will hop back over to the test client and show what this will look like on the user's end. All right, now we're back on the firewall. On the test client rather. So what we'll do is we'll try to connect now to the guest network. So let me just get the password. For the guest user. All right, I got it. So let's do Wi-Fi, connect to our demo network. And we see our login portal page. So the user is going to be user at fbi.com. And our password, we're going to type in let's just make sure that this matches. It is. So if we sign in, we are connected and we see now we have internet access. So now that shows how you can configure guest accounts and customize the captive portal for guest authentication using username and password. So now we'll hop back over to the firewall and we'll show the last type of portal page, which is going to be email collection. All right, so now we're going to cover the last type of captive portal, which is an email collection captive portal. So we've already done the disclaimer captive portal and a captive portal with guest accounts that you can configure for individual guest users. So now we'll talk about what they call an email collection captive portal. So this might be good for, you want to provide free guest internet access for your customers or your visitors or whatever, but you don't want to have to configure guest accounts for everybody, and you want it to be a little more intuitive than just a simple disclaimer. So the good thing about this too is that with the email collection, you can actually see the emails that users enter. So you'll be able to collect this data like daily or however often you want to get it, and then put those emails into a list and use it for marketing or newsletters or promos or whatever, right? So that's probably the main use for this one, and it's pretty easy to set up. So basically what happens is the customer or the user is greeted with a captive portal that just asks for the email, and as long as they enter a valid email, they will be granted network access, and then that email along with the MAC address of the device will be added to the collected emails device group. So we'll go over how to set this up, and then we'll test it out and then show how you can actually see these emails. So what we'll do first is go to our SSID and go down to the captive portal settings, and we'll set this to email collection like this. We'll hit OK. And we actually want to customize this portal like we've been doing. So if we go to our replacement messages and we look for email, you'll see we have email collection and email collection invalid, right? So this is the HTML message for email collection, and then this is the HTML for users if they enter an invalid email, right? So it's only going to work if they enter a valid email address. If they just type in like 123 in the box, it's not going to work. So what we can do is edit this, and you see this is the basic page that you're greeted with. So I went ahead and I created a custom one here. So I'll paste this in. And this is what we have. So it'll ask the user to enter their email address and to continue, and then as long as that email is valid, it will work. The only downside of this is that you could enter like test email at example.com or something like that, and it will still work. So you might get some of those, but you're basically just relying on the goodwill of your users to enter a valid email, right? So just a disclaimer out there. So we'll save this, and then we'll actually edit this one too. So you can see it's the same one, but we'll actually make this a little more intuitive where it'll actually, if they enter a invalid email, it'll actually tell them that they entered an invalid email and to try again. Like this, right? So you get this invalid email pop up here. So we'll save that. So now what we'll do is we have to create on our firewall policy we have to edit. This is a CLI only setting, by the way. So if we edit this and we want to do, the command is set email collect enable. And that will essentially allow those email users, and it'll put them in the policy here for network access. So that is basically it. So we set the captive portal to email collection. We updated the replacement messages to do a custom captive portal page, and then we added the email users to our outbound firewall policy. So let's hop over to the test client and see what that looks like on the user end. All right, so now we're on the test client, and now if we go to connect to the network again, we'll select our demo SSID, we'll hit connect, and once the page pops, we get our portal, and it's giving us our little disclaimer here. So we'll accept the terms, and it wants an email address. So we'll enter an email, right? So we can just enter an email we would use. So, right, like example user at gmail.com. Hit continue. And then we are now granted network access. So now we'll hop back over to the firewall and we'll see how we can actually view this data on the FortiGate. All right, so now that's done. Really the only thing left is to actually show how we can view these emails. So of course, if we go to the Wi-Fi clients, we'll be able to see that the user field will actually put that email in. But you can also get this information via the CLI. So if we open a CLI and we do a diagnose firewall auth MAC list, we can get the connected clients with the MAC address and the email that they entered. Now this would be easier to run reports on, because what you could do, you can get a little detailed here, and you could, for example, run an automation script that every day at a certain interval will run this command, collect all the output, and then email that output to whoever the recipient should be, and then they can parse that data and just pull the emails from that and then use that for marketing information. So that's something cool you could do. So play around with that. But that's going to be it for this video. We basically covered everything there is. Of course, you can get a little more detailed here with how you do your own captive portals and your different SSID settings, and of course the firewall policies and traffic shaping and all that. But I think all that's a little bit outside the scope of this video. I'll be doing some more detailed videos on things like that, like firewall policies and traffic shaping and all that. And one thing just that I just forgot to mention is that you notice that our captive portal was HTTP. You are able to do HTTPS portals and upload a certificate and all that if that is something you wanted to do. But again, I do not have a publicly signed cert to do that. So, but it is an option for you if you deem it necessary. But even if you don't, everything in the video will work without it. So thanks for watching. Any questions, leave them in the comments, and have a good one.